Hey everybody, welcome back. We are going to run through our first um, document today of those kind of founding documents. We're calling them the Documents of Freedom. So today at home you are taking a look at the Declaration of Independence. If you haven't yet, go back and watch the directions video to show you how everything should be laid out for today, including what things look like in Schoology. But for now, you should for sure have this note sheet up along with this video. And if you want to have the slides up at the same time, you can grab this document as well. All right, so we're going to get started right from the beginning. So if you remember in your documents, we're going to start with a quick review on what the Founding Fathers wanted for America. So if you would, go ahead and just pause this video right now and fill in this top pink section right here using that ACE format that we've been working on over the last few class periods here. Very similar to one of your practice paragraphs that you did last week. So hopefully this one is kind of quick and easy for you. All right, so great. Once you are done, go ahead and start this video and we'll get into the notes. All right. So as we look at the founding period, we've been talking a lot about what the Founding Fathers wanted, and now it's that transition of how do they make that into a government? How do they make that into something that is real? And it's going to start with the Declaration of Independence. Now, the Declaration of Independence itself does not set up our government, right? Instead, after the revolution had started, right, the war had already technically begun in April of 1775. But the Declaration is going to be an official letter letting the king know that now this fighting is about us trying to break free. When the revolution started in April, so over a year before the Declaration of Independence was signed in 1775, it started. People really believed at that time that they were still in this period of trying to figure out how to make this relationship with Great Britain work. It had just escalated to the point where now they were full out violence. However, in July of 1776, you had a group of guys, the Second Continental Congress. They're called the Get Together. Representatives from all 13 colonies get together in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and they sit down trying to figure out what to do next. And really, they come up with the best plan forward is to just try and break free, to try and make this country their own. And so that's what the Declaration, the point of the Declaration was. A lot of people say it was kind of like the ultimate breakup letter, breaking away from this relationship that they've been trying to fix for way over a decade, couple decades at this point. So as far as who wrote the Declaration, Thomas Jefferson is going to get a ton of the credit. He writes the rough draft. A lot of the words are his. However, there was a committee of men who gave him suggestions and provided edits and things like that along the way. So those included some people you've heard of, and probably some people you haven't. So Roger Sherman, John Adams, Ben Franklin, Robert Livingston, and then of course Thomas Jefferson. So these guys get together, and Jefferson itself, you can see that image there, hammers this thing out in a very short amount of time. And actually the place that he did it is still in Philadelphia today. He basically holed himself away in this apartment. I think it's this room right here called the Graff House, I believe. It's still in downtown Philadelphia, kind of in that historic district. Independence Hall is very close to here as well. And he holed himself there away in this kind of apartment. They still have his writing desk that he used for this. And when he was done, he brought it back to this committee of guys here. And we're going to pause right here, and I'm going to show you a quick video clip of kind of what we think maybe this time where they're looking through the edits and looking for Jefferson's rough draft, what they think this might have looked like. This is from a series called John Adams, obviously about the life of John Adams, put out by HBO a while ago. All right, here we go. Maybe. Refresh it.
altogether unexpected. Not only a declaration of our independence, but of the rights of all men. This is well said, sir. Very, very well said. Christian King of Great Britain has waged cruel war against human nature itself, in the persons of a distant people who never offended him, captivating and carrying them into slavery in another hemisphere. Yes, you lay the evils of slavery at the feet of the king, but you say nothing of slavery itself, sir. Now, surely, if the trade is outlawed but ownership is not, then those unfortunate Negroes still in servitude will become a more lucrative commodity. Well, that's not what I intended, Dr. Franklin. Slavery is an abomination and must be loudly proclaimed as such, but I own that neither I nor any man has any immediate solution to the problem. Oh, well, tis no matter. The issue before us is independence and not emancipation. Dr. Franklin, this document is something our friends in the Congress will debate, but I would be very surprised if they will countenance an attack on slavery. Now, we hold these truths to be sacred and undeniable, that all men are created equal, etc. Sacred and undeniable. Smacks of the pulpit. These truths are self-evident, are they not? Self-evident, then. Self-evident? Self-evident. Do not mistake me, sir. I share your sentiment. Every single word was precisely chosen. I assure you of that, Dr. Franklin. Yes.
All right, sorry, trying to get it pause there. So, as you can see, just in that clip, that even Thomas Jefferson's words were talked through by Benjamin Franklin and by John Adams and a couple of these other guys here along the way. Nothing was seen as perfect from the beginning. This was definitely a group effort, and they knew that that's the way it should be going in. It had to be not the voice of one guy or not the voice of one colony, but it had to be a joint effort by all of these men together if they were going to make an impression on Great Britain and if anyone was going to take them seriously through this. All right. So one of the things I do talk about in that clip is this idea of slavery. And ironically, Thomas Jefferson does bring up the issue of slavery, which is, it's ironic because he himself was a slave owner his entire life. However, they decided at that point, even in the Declaration, to not really bring up the issue of slavery. And the idea is really out of fear that if you make this about slavery, half of the colonies or more are not going to be on board out of fear that they're going to lose their ability to have slaves, which they felt their entire economy was wrapped up in that need to own people, to be profitable. So it was deleted to not offend the southern colonies going forward here. All right. So the purpose of the Declaration was to officially and specifically tell Great Britain why colonists were no longer accepting their ruling and their laws. It was a very specific, this is what we believe, this is how we think you are not doing those things, and so therefore we are going to break away and form our own country. And if you want us to stop, you're going to have to do it by force, hence the Revolutionary War. So in the preamble, that introduction piece, they lay out our political philosophy in America. So it's really all those things we talked about last week with what the founding fathers wanted for America, right, is wrapped up in this preamble. And so the preamble itself looks like this, right? And this is probably the most famous part, right? We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and that among these rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. So that is a pretty wordy piece there. And what we're going to do now is we're going to take a look at what does this mean? If this is the political philosophy of America, if this is the basis of what our entire government is kind of set up on, right, what does that mean? That's where we have to start. So we're going to go back into your notes, and you filled out some notes about what the Declaration is, right? But now we here have one of those pink sections, those required sections for the notes sections here. So I have this printed here. Maybe you were following along as I was reading it. But the first step to taking a passage and understanding what it means is to straight up get the definitions. So what I'd like you to do is at this point, pause this video, and I want you to look up these words. Just Google them, right? And figure out and define what these things mean right here. Then, once you've done that, I want you to take these definitions and use them to fill in the blanks. So that in the end, then you have something that's very similar to up here, but now in your own words, or maybe words that you're more familiar with to help you make sense of what this is. All right, so pause this video now and go ahead and do those two steps, defining these words and then using those definitions to roughly fill in the blanks here so we get a greater understanding of what this is. All right, so now that you have filled this piece out, tomorrow in class we'll take a look at specifically what you put as far as what you think that preamble means. If that's going to define who we are and what our government is, what does that actually mean? Now, the next section here, excuse me, is this is the breakdown of the Declaration itself, right? So we're going to take a look at that in our next few slides here. All right. So as we're looking at, I have broken this up, into 4 main parts. And different historians, different people break this up in different ways. They just do. So this is just the simple way that I took a look at it for class specifically. So we did the preamble. Next is a statement of philosophy, then grievances, and the closing statement. So just a really quick look here at what these mean. So I've gone to, this is the National Archives Museum, website, and in this, there is all sorts of information about historical documents. You can find all this stuff online. So here it is, the Declaration of Independence, right? And here is our preamble. So again, we only looked at part of what our philosophy is here. Right? We could have gone on and on and on if we wanted. So you have your introduction, right? We have our statement of philosophy here, right? Then we have our grievances. And this is probably the part that gets overlooked because within the grievances section, the writers, Thomas Jefferson and those that worked with him, specifically laid out very specific ways that they think that the king and parliament in turn went against our statement of philosophy of what government should be, ways that they went against us, ways that they wronged us, and they specifically laid it out. Right? And they went through, you can look here, there are several things that they call the king out for. Right? So we could take the time and kind of read through them and talk about all these. We're not really going to do that not right now, but a couple of them maybe. This one stands out for depriving us in many cases of the benefits of trial by jury. That's something we assume we have as Americans, right? That if I'm accused of a crime, that I'm going to have some sort of legal trial where people have to prove that I did those things. Right? So that's one way. But there's all these couple dozen ways that they specifically said the king was not following their rights as citizens. Then you do have the closing statement down here. So if you go through all of this, we've got the statement of philosophy, right? We've got our grievances, and then you go down here, and they've got basically saying, because of these things, we are breaking free from you. We can no longer make this relationship work. We are done. We are through. And if you want us to stay, you're going to have to make us, which is where the war comes into play. And the cause and the purpose of the war switches with the signing of the Declaration. And then the last part here, you have all these signatures down below, where you have, men from all 13 colonies have signed their names. And though, of course, most famously, you do have John Hancock of Virginia with that big, giant signature. Oh, no, he's not from Virginia. He's from Massachusetts. With that big, giant signature. So, anyway. So, with all of this, these guys signed this. Now, this wasn't a done deal. It took some discussion. It took some time for them to come to this conclusion, because what they're doing in trying and deciding to break away from Great Britain is they're basically declaring war or accepting war with Great Britain. And Great Britain was the biggest, strongest, most powerful military in the world. They had an empire all over the place. We talked about that last week. And we are just one piece of that empire. So who are we to challenge Great Britain? But we did it anyway. Thankfully, it worked out, and we'll get into that later. So as they're getting into this then, this political cartoon comes up. And this political cartoon was done by Benjamin Franklin, but it originally actually came up about almost 2 decades even before this. But it gets this kind of resurgence of popularity during this time period, this join or die. So you have this snake, and each snake kind of represents a different part of the colonies here, and this idea that if they're not together, they're going to die. If they don't join together, they're not going to make it. So for this next section, what I'd like you to do is take a closer look at this political cartoon. So this is another way that we look at primary sources and start to analyze what they say. A couple of ways that you can take a look at this. I've got an article right here, the story behind the Join or Die cartoon. So this is one way you can take a look at some of the information behind what this cartoon was all about. And as you can see, it is not very long. So that's one way to take a look. The other way that you can gain some more background knowledge about this is through this video here. And so watching this video,
Benjamin Franklin, owner and editor of the Philadelphia
you are able
Gazette,
to get a little more information. So please pause this video now. Watch or read these. You can do them both too if you want both those perspectives. And then go ahead and write this ACE paragraph answering this question. What is the significance, or why is this cartoon important at the start of the American Revolution? So go ahead and pause and take care of those two things right now before you move on. All right. I'm going to reload this now here. Here you have that cartoon. I'll be interested to see what you found out. All right, so the vote to approve the Declaration was not a slam dunk. It was not easy, as I mentioned before. One of the biggest reasons why is because signing this document was like declaring to the world that you are committing treason. Do we know what treason is? Treason means basically you are going against or trying to overthrow your government. The punish for treason then and now is death. And so they were committed to that by signing their name. Also, from the standpoint of these men, it had to be unanimous. If they had one colony that was kind of wavering, just like that political cartoon showed you, it wasn't going to work, right? So they all had to be in. They all had to agree to this, all of those dozens of men. Finally, on July 2nd of 1776, they approved the final version of the Declaration, and they're going to publicly announce this on July 4th, which is why we celebrate the 4th of July, or Independence Day on July 4th. because that's when it was made known that this was happening. Now, the official declaration was not finally signed by all those guys until almost a month later in August. Again, things just take forever back then. All that stuff, there's several copies of it. They all had to be written out by hand. They had to be delivered to all these places. So things just take time for that to happen. And so that's why it took over a month here to get into this. The declaration itself, like a lot of documents back then, was meant to be read out loud. It was meant for people to hear it being said. A lot of people couldn't read, especially in more rural areas. Education was not quite as common, obviously, as it is now. And so it was meant to be performed. People would stand up in the local city square, and they would read what this document was saying. And that was a practice people were common to doing. A lot of great announcements kind of came out that way, part of the tradition, part of the culture back then. So all of this being said, they declare this, they declare it publicly, they sign their names to this, all the colonies seem to be on board. However, none of this would matter if we didn't win the war. And so that's when that real work begins, right? And it's with this that they send George Washington out to start organizing not just local militias, local militaries, but now a nationwide American colonial army under the head of George Washington. And again, we'll get more into the details of the war in our War and Peace unit. All right. If you're interested, there is a video here that takes you through kind of what that vote process might have looked like. It's from that John Adams series again, and then a quick review of the Declaration also. A couple more videos for you. All right, so as they get into this, I'm going to have you pause one more time before we move on to what is the importance of the Declaration today. And I really want you to take a second and think about this in your own life. If we reflect on America and we reflect on everything that we went through and the things that we endured to get to the point where we just wanted to be free of this, it took a lot of time and effort to get there, and it was a big deal to declare independence from Great Britain. So I want you to think about your life, and given the opportunity, and you can fill this out on your note sheet, given the opportunity, what would you declare independence from in your life? If you could pick one thing to publicly say, I am done with this. This thing is going against who I am. It is not making me a better person. It is causing me to do things that are not good for me. What would you declare your independence from? So go ahead and pause. And again, in your note sheet, take the time to talk about what you would declare it from, why, right, and how being free of that thing would make your life better. Go ahead. All right. So now we get to the point here where we take a look at the Declaration today. And we're going to start by taking a look at how is the Declaration preserved.
How is the Declaration of Independence protected from the elements, billions of visitors, and most of all, time? The National Archives and Records Administration uses physics, chemistry, and technology to keep one of our nation's most important historic documents safe. A special encasement designed by the National Institute of Standards and Technology uses aluminum and titanium to isolate the Declaration of Independence from the outside environment. The frame and base were machined from solid blocks of metal to minimize the risk of leaks. End-to-seal made of tin and a nickel alloy keeps air out. A double-layered piece of tempered glass with an anti-reflective coating is suspended over the document. It's not bulletproof, sorry Nick Cage, but it is strong enough to withstand changes in temperature and barometric pressure. The document sits on a sheet of cellulose paper, which helps regulate humidity, and an aluminum platform precisely cut to fit the parchment's irregular edges so it's invisible to visitors. Parchment, which is made from animal skin, is sensitive to air pollution and changes in humidity, so the air inside the case is inert argon gas at a relative humidity of 40%. Argon won't react with the parchment, and its atoms are too large to escape through glass, unlike helium, which was used in an older case. If the humidity is too low, the parchment can crack, or ink can flake off. But if it's too humid, collagen in the animal skin can turn to gelatin. To monitor the conditions inside the case, archivists use a tool called an absorption spectrometer. A beam of light shines into the case through a small sapphire window. It's reflected by a series of mirrors under the platform to a sensor behind another sapphire window. This system can detect changes in humidity or the gas composition. Modifications can be made to run other tests. The case is so airtight the NIST estimates it will be 100 years or more before the oxygen concentration in the case reaches 0.5%. The origin of Americans' life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness will be secure for many more Independence Days, thanks to science.
Awesome. All right. Oops. Does this to me? Here we go. So the Declaration itself today has they've taken a lot of time and effort, and obviously used a lot of science to try and figure out how to keep this thing as secure and preserved as possible. For a long time, that wasn't the case. There used to be several copies of the Declaration, but many have faded pretty terribly over the years. Throughout that time, they would put it on display. It would go, copies of it would go around to different museums, and people were able to see it and not so much touch it, but it was just handled with a lot less care than it is now. All right. So with that, that's kind of where we're at. The Declaration itself is still one of our most important documents that we have. Really, it's the beginning of us taking these philosophical ideas and putting them down on paper, declaring to the world that here in America, and that we wanted to be different, that we wanted to treat people differently, that even if we haven't even today yet got it right, like there is a mission for us to work for bringing equality to the lives of all people. So what I'd like you to do now is we've got one more section here in the notes for today, and then we're going to be done taking a look at the Declaration review. So at this point, we're going to end today by doing this last paragraph, bringing it back to the preamble that we looked at earlier, and describe how America hoped to be different from other countries. So again, these are topics that we've talked about already. So now let's use our preamble to answer that question based on what you figured out about what that means. All right, and then that is it for the day. We're going to stop here at the Articles of Confederation. You do not need to turn this document in yet. We're going to keep working over this the next couple of days. So please just hang tight, and tomorrow when you're back in class, we will go through this one more time. The last thing that we're going to do then today while you're wrapping that up is I'm going to play one more video for you that'll give us a nice summary of the things we've talked about here today. Thanks, guys.
The Declaration of Independence, for me, is one of the best pieces of writing I've ever seen.
It's a revolutionary document for a revolutionary statement.
You cannot help but be stirred when you read those words.
Thomas Jefferson's writing is absolutely magnificent. When he wrote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal." That was the first time anybody had bothered to write that down.
And then you turn the clock back and think of when he was writing, how young he was, what a statement it was given the history of the world at that point. And you feel the excitement of being on the cusp of something so profound that it's hard to put it into words.
If you review our Declaration of Independence, it has those beautiful words about all men are created equal and governments are formed among men to represent the people. It's a good statement of what we're all about. And that's the only thing people remember about the Declaration of Independence, that it was about all men are created equal. But it's really a roughly a 28-count indictment against King George. And therefore, because of the way in which the British Crown treated us, we now declare that we are a free country, and we want to let you know why. Now, we're going to have a war. We're going to have a war.
In 1776, you have the Continental Congress meeting in Philadelphia, debating a unified position for the colonies with respect to the hostilities that have already broken out. And the fundamental issue between them is, are they fighting for their rights as Englishmen within the British Empire, or are they going to fight for independence? And they're seriously divided. People who are perfectly willing to resist the tyranny of the British government are not necessarily willing to strike for independence. But there's a groundswell in favor of it, I think, in large measure because they recognize that having provoked the lion this far, there's no going back.
All of a sudden you have this group of people who are going, no, we're not part of some great chain of being with the king at the top of it. We are free people. We can vote for who we want to have in charge. And we're not going to tolerate you telling us that we have some class status we have to be trapped in. It says, we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, meaning that Parliament in London, the King himself, the courts cannot interfere and take away your rights because the state can't take power from us. So even to this day, it's probably the most central difference between America and every other country in the world.
It goes well beyond what was needed in order to declare independence. It establishes a philosophical basis for a civil democracy in which all persons are guaranteed rights by virtue of their personhood.
This political genius, not just in Jefferson, but in Adams and all the other people who collected here, they saw a new time for humankind, which is that we can be free and that we can make decisions for ourselves.
Thanks, guys. Have a great rest of your day. We'll see you tomorrow.